As with most things in life, this crafting project did not go as planned. As some of you may know, I'm participating in National Novel Writing Month this year, and I wanted to make a map to visualize my story better. And since I didn't want this video to just be another map, I thought it would be fun to somehow back the map with leather. Cool. Sounds easy enough. I borrowed some thin 1 to 2 ounce leather from my husband's stash and set to work cutting out a piece that was large enough to fit over the backside of some large watercolor sheets that I had dyed for a previous project. I wanted to use one of these sheets to draw my map on. Cutting out the leather was easy enough. I measured the piece to be about 1 inch wider than my sheet of paper, around 3 of the edges, and added about 6 inches of length to one end. To be honest, the additional 6 inches was just for aesthetic purposes, but I also thought it would help keep the paper on the leather when you rolled it up in case the paper decided to slide as you were rolling it. Next step was to dye the leather. I am not an expert, so please do not take any of this as gospel. My husband was my leather resource for this project. If you do want some great leather tutorials, check out Kit's videos over on Skilltree. That is if you don't follow him already. If you are looking for leather projects for LARP or cosplay, I would definitely recommend that you check out his channel. I used some leather dye in this shade Saddle Tan. I wet the leather and applied the dye in a couple of directions to prevent streaking. Then I thought it'd be fun, nay, a great idea, to dye the backside of the leather. The basic idea behind this was that when I had the map roll open, the backside of the leather would not appear to be unfinished. I'm just going to cut to the chase here. I screwed up. Yep, I'll admit it. The dye unfortunately bled through the leather in a couple of spots, probably because of the thickness of the leather. But you know when you get wet spots on drywall? Yeah. It looked a little bit like hot garbage. If hot garbage looked like wet spots on drywall. The best part of this was my husband telling me that leather dye is very forgiving. That's what I'm going to say in my video. It's very forgiving.
There you go.
Justin said so. Well, that's just because it hadn't met me yet. At this point, I honestly didn't know what to do because my last brain cell had jumped ship earlier in the day, and I really didn't want to start over, despite my husband telling me that he would just use the ruined leather for another project. So I left it. And then it came to me, Eureka! I would use the ruined piece of leather, but I would need to pivot. I decided to make what can only be described as a giant leather envelope. Then I could store my map inside of it and roll it up to make some sort of kind of map case. Something map case adjacent. With a new plan in place and more brain cells accumulated, I set to work cutting yet another piece of leather. This piece will be the same size as the one I cut previously, but only dyed on one side. Once dyed, I applied some Neatsfoot oil to the surface of the leather to prevent it from drying out. And then buffed the surface. This is supposed to help blend the dye together. I finished by applying some resin to help protect the leather. I then left this piece to dry under a weight. I used my glass cutting mat as a weight to cover the entire surface and help it dry flat. This was an additional issue to the first piece that I had cut. Then I got to work on my map. I'll be the first to admit that I am not an artist, so if you ever feel like you can't draw anything, don't worry about it. Neither can I. I sketched out the basic concept ahead of time and then transferred some of that design to my pre-stained paper. The setting of my story is on a hillside city where the buildings begin at the harbor and then go up towards a grand palace, sort of built on these meandering roads that travel up towards the palace. My thought was that this map was sketched by a spy from a neighboring nation and was going to be used in an assassination plot. The map was then smuggled to another operative who keeps it stored in his map case adjacent leather envelope. Yeah, that sounds realistic enough. And no, that is not what my story is about, just a tiny snippet of a detail. My tale is about a barmaid. Yep. I cut the offending part off my original piece of leather and then trimmed up the edges so they were roughly the same width. I then burnished the backside of the larger piece instead of dyeing it. I used gum tragacanth and a bone folder to flatten the backside of the leather. I then glued the edges of the two pieces together with leather glue and left an opening at one end. This was probably my least favorite part. I struggled to get such large pieces lined up without making a mess. In the end, though, I did manage to get them somewhat glued together. Passing grade for me. C+. Yay. I may be wrong, but this appears to just hold the pieces together so then you can stitch it afterwards. I then marked the stitch line around the 3 edges using a wing divider. And then punched holes around the 3 edges using that line as a guide. I then used saddle stitch to sew the 3 edges together. I probably enjoyed this part the best. I don't mind stitching, it's labor intensive and repetitive, but throw on a podcast or something or some music while you're doing it, and it is one of the most meditative and relaxing, stress-reducing crafts things that you can do. Once stitched up, I added a couple of grommets to the flap end of the map case adjacent envelope. This way I could run some leather cording through the holes and use the cord to keep the pouch rolled up. The leather cording was not the color that I wanted, but was all that we had on hand at the time. But once it was all finished, I really don't mind the contrast of the colors. I did take some time to hammer my stitches flat and burnish the edges of the leather to give my project a more finished look. These were suggestions from my house project QA manager, whose eye for detail overrules my need for having a project completed. If you're ever wondering if you did a good job making something, find yourself a craft QA person. But be warned, they don't always give you the passing grade you want. I have to say, I actually really love how this map case envelope thing turned out. And it would be cool to add a strap or something so that it could be carried. It would be easy enough to slip a belt through the middle part of the rolled up envelope and sling it over your back or shoulder so that you can carry it around. But what about my map? If only I could snap my fingers and have that done. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Pam and this is Total Pamarchy, the craft channel with a little anarchy. Until next time, bye.